Imagine for a moment that everything you see, everything you feel, and everything you believe yourself to be is nothing more than a reflection, not a reflection of the world, but a reflection of something observing you from within. Have you ever wondered who is truly listening to these words right now? Who is behind your thoughts? Observing even when you're doing nothing. Because what you're about to discover isn't a superficial idea. It's not just another theory. It's an ancient, profound truth, whispered by sages throughout the centuries and understood by very few. Today, you're going to embark on a journey into the universe's deepest secret. A secret that can change the way you understand your life, your mind, your very existence. But there's something unsettling. The final revelation you'll hear today will be the most powerful of all, probably the one you'll never forget. If you feel something within you is already awakening, type in the comments now, "I am the silent witness." And if this message is touching something deep within you, if you feel this energy deserves to stay alive and expand, you can support this space with a super chat as a conscious gesture of support for this vibration we're sharing now. Breathe slowly and allow your attention to turn inward, because what you'll discover isn't outside. It has always been within you, long before cities existed. Modern cities, before the world was filled with the constant noise we now consider normal, before science claimed a monopoly on what could be called valid knowledge, there were human beings who chose to dedicate their entire lives to an investigation that had no lab, no instruments, and no methodology publishable in any academic journal. Their laboratory was silence. Their instrument was naked attention, unfiltered, without an agenda, without any prior hypothesis to confirm. And their object of study was something that couldn't be seen from the outside, because it was found in the most intimate and inaccessible place that exists, the interior of experience itself. These beings didn't live in the same places, nor spoke the same languages, nor belonged to the same cultures, nor followed the same intellectual traditions. Many didn't even know that the others existed, and yet they arrived with a consistency that defies any explanation based on coincidence, to descriptions that correspond with each other with astonishing precision, as if they had explored the same territory from points of completely different entry, and had drawn maps that, although with different names and different symbols, described the same geography. The rishis of ancient India, who retreated into forests and caves for entire decades, who renounced all comfort and all entertainment to direct the entirety of their attention toward the interior. They transmitted their discoveries in the texts we know today as the Upanishads, and what they described with their words was something they called Atman, the pure consciousness that is the witness of all experience, without being affected by a presence that is not born with the body nor dies with it, that doesn't increase when things go well, nor decrease when things complicate, that remains absolutely unchangeable amidst all possible changes in human experience. The Zen monks of medieval Japan, who spent years sitting in meditation, facing koans, those questions impossible to solve with ordinary logic, like what is the sound of one hand, arrived through that strenuous process at what they called Kensho or Sadori, a direct vision of one's true nature that instantly dissolved the illusion of being a self separate from the rest of existence. Not an intellectual understanding, but a sudden and complete recognition that reorganized everything. The Sufi masters of medieval Islam, who used poetry and music and the whirling movement of the dervishes as vehicles towards states of consciousness that the rational mind couldn't reach on its own, describe the experience of fana, the annihilation of the ego in the divine presence, not as a state of unconsciousness, but as the most lucid possible recognition that what they believed they were was merely a veil over what they truly were. That individual identity, that character they had built, defended, and cultivated throughout their lives was not the ultimate reality, but the threshold to it. The contemplatives of mystical Christianity, from Meister Eckhart in medieval Germany to St. John of the Cross in 16th century Spain, describe the union with God not as a meeting between two separate entities approaching from different distances, but as the gradual and sometimes sudden recognition that the separation had never been real, that the seeker and the sought were from the beginning the same, both thing seen from two perspectives that ignorance had artificially kept separate. The philosophers of Taoism in China, Amerindian shamans, Kabbalists of Hebrew mysticism, Tibetan Buddhist masters with their intricate maps of consciousness all essentially pointed to the same thing, towards something that underlies all possible experience, something present in fear and joy, in pain and pleasure, in clarity and confusion, untouched by any of them, a consciousness that observes without being observed, that knows without being known, that illuminates everything in its field without needing any external light source, because it itself is the light. And this presence, all these masters said with different voices, yet with a profound coherence that cannot be ignored. It's not something human beings need to acquire, develop, or deserve. It's not the prize at the end of a long path of spiritual practice. It's not the exclusive privilege of saints, geniuses, or those who have hours to meditate daily. It's what human beings already are at their most fundamental mental, the basis on which all experience occurs, the field where all perception arises and dissolves, the presence that was here before the first thought and will remain here after the last. The problem was never the absence of this consciousness. Consciousness cannot be absent, because it's the very condition of all experience. The problem was, and continues to be, forgetfulness. The indus, the identification, so complete, so continuous, so deeply habitual with the variable contents of experience, with the thoughts that circulate ceaselessly, with the stories told about oneself, with the identities patiently built over the years, that the presence containing them all becomes completely eclipsed, as when clouds cover the sky so densely that from the surface it seems that the sky has disappeared, not because the sky ceased to exist, not because anything irreversible has occurred, but because the view from below can no longer see what is still there. There it speaks, unaffected, waiting with a patience that is not impatient, because it doesn't need anything to change to be completely what it is. And then the fundamental confusion occurs that these traditions uniformly describe as the root of all human suffering. The human being begins to identify with the clouds, begins to believe that it is the clouds, that when the dark clouds of sadness or fear or shame arrive, he has definitively become dark and sad and afraid and ashamed, so that when the clouds of joy or success or love pass, he has lost something essential that he needs to recover at any cost. And so begins the most exhausting and futile endeavor a human life can undertake, the permanent management of clouds, trying to expel the dark ones, trying to retain the bright ones, living in a state of perpetual tension regarding something that moves by its own laws, no matter how much energy is invested in controlling it. The knowledge these traditions guarded so carefully, the knowledge they transmitted from master to disciple in conditions of silence and trust. It wasn't information about the outer universe. It wasn't theological doctrine or philosophical cosmology, although sometimes they used those languages as coverings. It was the map of return, the map to that heaven that was always present, that never went away, anywhere, that doesn't need to be created from scratch, but only recognized not as an idea, but as a direct and irrefutable experience, a recognition that changes everything without changing anything. Because what changes are not the circumstances, but the perspective from which they are lived. If these words awaken something ancient within you right now, I remember what lives in me. And if you feel a deep resonance, a feeling difficult to explain but impossible to ignore, you can offer a super chat as a conscious gesture, like someone who feeds a flame that deserves to keep illuminating. There is a type of suffering that is different from all others, different from physical pain that has a localizable cause and generally a possible resolution, different from grief for a concrete loss that follows the natural arc of emotion towards its eventual integration, different from frustration in the face of a specific obstacle that can be faced with determined actions. This suffering, it's of a different nature. It's diffuse, persistent. It appears at the most unexpected moments, amid pleasant conversations, during well-deserved vacations, in those moments of stillness that should be for rest. It doesn't have a clear cause to point to in order to fight it, and it's extraordinarily difficult to articulate because it lacks the clear language of pain, nor the orderly narrative of grief. It's simply a background feeling that something essential is missing, not in external circumstances, but somewhere deeper and like a restlessness that entertainment temporarily appeases, but that returns at the first moment of silence. A thirst that success doesn't quench, even if you achieve exactly what you were pursuing. A loneliness that can be felt even amidst affectionate relationships, amid crowded parties, amidst the most active and socially connected life imaginable. People who experience this generally arrive at one of two interpretations. The first is that something is wrong with themselves, that they are too demanding or too sensitive, or that they have some psychological problem that needs to be corrected, or that they simply don't know how to be happy, like others seem to be. The second is that something is wrong with their circumstances, that if they got the right partner, the right job, the right income level, the right one, the right city, the right body, the right family, that emptiness will finally, and so years pass, sometimes entire decades, oscillating between these two interpretations, modifying external circumstances with determination and inventiveness, working on internal symptoms with honesty and effort, consulting books and therapists and spiritual traditions without ever reaching the real root of the problem, because the real root is neither in the circumstances nor in the psychological symptoms. The root lies in a fundamental confusion about the nature of what one is in what Eastern contemplative traditions call primordial ignorance. And it's important to understand what this word means in this context, because it doesn't have the pejorative sense it has in everyday use. Not ignorance as a defect of intelligence, nor as a lack of information, nor as a moral failing. Ignorance in the precise technical sense of not recognizing what one is, of confusing what one is not with what one is, of taking the content for the container, the map, the film for the screen it's projected on. From the earliest years of life, the human being receives very precise instructions, although almost none of them are explicit or conscious, on how to build a functional encounter, how to given a name and learn that that name is them. A family history is described to them, and they learn that history defines them. They are shown their own characteristics, skills and flaws, roles and expectations, and they learn to organize all of them into a more or less coherent narrative that they call my life, or my story, or simply me. This construct is necessary. It's the indispensable tool that allows us to function in the social world. Without it, there would be no possible communication, no contracts, no commitments, no relationships sustained over time. The problem was never that this identity exists. The problem is the exclusive identification with it, the implicit belief rarely questioned, because rarely does one become aware that that is all one is. Because when a human being identifies exclusively with this mental and social construct, which is the ego identity, automatically inherits the entire system of threats that comes with it. If I am my story, everything that threatens my story threatens me in an existential way. If I am my reputation, every negative judgment is a wound that touches the core of who I am. If I am my achievements, every failure is not a passing stumble, but an amputation of my worth as a being. If I am my relationships, every loss is to some extent a partial death of myself. If I am my body, every illness, every sign of deterioration, and especially the prospect of death are absolute threats against which there is no definitive defense possible. Fear in all its forms and all its disguises, anxiety, insecurity, the compulsive need for approval, the difficulty with genuine intimacy, the inability to rest in the simple fact of existing without constantly doing, achieving, or demonstrating something. This is all the inevitable experience of someone who has reduced their identity to something fragile, limited, temporary. The chronic anxiety that characterizes the experience of so many in the contemporary world didn't come from nowhere as an unfortunate evolutionary accident. It's the logical, perfectly coherent response of someone trying to protect something they deep down perceive cannot be protected. Definitively, who deep down knows, even if not articulated, that everything they believe themselves to be is subject to change, deterioration, loss, and therefore the task of keeping that self intact and protected and valued is an endless, naturally exhausting endeavor, impossible to complete satisfactorily. But here something deeply hopeful appears, and that is that this suffering, unlike many forms of human pain, is not humanity's permanent or inevitable destiny of human beings. It's not a condition one has to learn to manage or learn to live with. It's the direct, precise symptom of a confusion that can be undone, not through willpower, mental discipline, or any behavior modification technique, but through the direct, experiential, actual recognition of what one is beyond the constructed identity. When someone experiences, even for an instant, the present silent observer that watches all the contents of its experience without being any of them, something changes in the structure of their suffering at a level that no analysis or therapy can directly reach. Not all difficulties immediately disappear. Conditioned patterns aren't erased overnight. The wounds of the past still need to heal. External circumstances remain as they are. A different internal reference appears, a resting place that doesn't depend on anything changing externally to be accessible. A stability that doesn't need to be built with effort because it's not a conquest but a recognition, and that reference, once found, even briefly, changes the direction of all searching afterward, because what's recognized as only found inside is no longer sought outside. If you've ever felt there's something more within you, something you seek to remember rather than find, right now, I'm ready to remember. And if these words are touching a deep part of your soul, you can support this message with a super chat, conscious, energetic exchange as a way to keep this teaching alive, which deserves to continue circulating. There's a thought experiment that philosophers and contemplative masters have proposed in various ways throughout history, an experiment that seems simple when stated, and that produces, when carried out with honesty and sufficient depth, a disturbance that cannot be ignored, the disturbance of someone watching a certainty unravel that was never questioned. The experiment is this: try to find the self, not the idea of the self, not thoughts about the self, not the memories that make up the story of the self, nor expectations about its future. The self itself, that entity you believe yourself to be, that being behind everything you experience, that has thoughts, feels emotions, makes decisions, and has a past it remembers and a future it anticipates. Look for it directly, not with the mind that theorizes, but with the attention that observes. Where exactly is it? What form does it take? What is it made of? Does it have limits? Does it have a precise location inside the body or outside of it? Can you point to it with your finger or with your attention? In the same way you can point to any other object of experience. And then something unsettling happens. When you search for the self with enough care and honesty, when you truly try to find it instead of just assuming it's there, what you find is that you can't find it. Not in the sense that it exists, but is hiding. But in the sense that no matter how much you look, no matter what direction you explore with your attention, no matter how many layers you peel back in your search, there's nothing there that has the consistency and solidity the self always promised to have. You can find thoughts, you can find bodily sensations, you can find emotions, you can find images and memories and anticipations and narratives. But the self that supposedly has all of that, the self that was supposed to be there as the owner and manager of all those experiences, doesn't appear anywhere as an object separable from those experiences themselves. David Hume was an 18th century Scottish philosopher whose intellectual honesty led him to conclusions that profoundly disturbed Western philosophy. He arrived at this through introspective analysis and recorded it with a clarity that leaves no room for misunderstanding. When I enter most intimately into what I call myself, he wrote, I always stumble on some particular perception, heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pleasure. I can never catch myself at any time without a perception and can never observe anything but the perception. This is extraordinary. And 18th century Western philosopher, without any direct influence from Buddhism or Vedanta or any other Eastern contemplative tradition, arriving by his own means at exactly the same conclusion that Buddhist masters had reached centuries earlier through direct meditation. Buddhist masters called this discovery anatman, the doctrine of no self, and it's crucial to understand exactly what this means because it's easy to misinterpret it in ways that make it terrifying or nihilistic, when in reality it points towards something deeply liberating. And that is not the doctrine that you don't exist. It's not the claim that there's no one here, but the more precise claim that what exists is not what you thought it was. What exists is not a solid, permanent, independent self located somewhere specific within the body or mind. What exists is a flow of experiences, a river of perceptions and thoughts and sensations and emotions that flows continuously and without interruption, without any separate owner of that flow having it as a possession. The self is not the bank from which the river is observed. The self is the river itself, telling a story about a bank that exists outside of it. It's a narrative that the mind continuously constructs from memory and anticipation, connecting past and future moments into a line that seems continuous and coherent, that seems like someone's story, but is actually a permanent reconstruction, a story that is recreated at every moment from the materials available at that moment. And this story is real, in the sense that it has real effects. It influences decisions, shapes relationships, produces genuine emotional experiences, but it's not real in the sense of pointing to a permanent, independent entity that exists outside of it. Like a character in a novel, it's real in that it evokes emotions in the reader and affects the narrative, but it doesn't exist outside the pages that contain it. Now, if the self you believe yourself to be is a narrative construct, then its characteristics aren't fixed in the way they appear to be. Its limitations aren't as absolute as they seem. Its fears aren't as inevitable as they feel when experienced from within. What a narrative is built, a different narrative, a different perspective, a different level of understanding can transform, and even deeper, if the self is a construct, then there's something that built that construct and sustains it, something that precedes it, something that makes any experience possible, including the experience of being a self, occur. Something that was present before the story began and will remain present when the story reaches its natural conclusion. That something is what all contemplative traditions point to when they speak of the witness, of pure consciousness, of Atman, of Buddha nature, of being without attributes, not as a bigger or higher self that replaces the small self within the same structure, but as the radical absence of self, which paradoxically turns out to be more real, more alive, more luminous than any self. The emptiness that is not empty of anything important, but liberated from what was never essential. When someone begins to intuit this, when the crack in the identity they believe themselves to be opens even slightly, what might initially feel like vertigo, like a loss, as if the ground is disappearing beneath your feet, gradually transforms into something completely unexpected. It transforms into relief. The relief of not having to be that character all the time. The deep, almost physical relief of not having to constantly defend deep down could never definitively defend itself. The relief of discovering that what you are at the deepest level needs no defense because it cannot be lost, because it cannot be attacked. It needs no validation because it doesn't depend on anyone's approval to be completely what it is. It cannot be lost because it was never acquired at any point, but was always there as the very condition of all possible experience. If you've ever felt that your identity isn't all that you are right now, I am not just my story. If this discovery is stirring something deep within you, if you feel this teaching deserves to live on, you can support this space through a super chat. As a conscious act of support for this understanding we share. There's a distinction that seems small when you first hear it, which might sound like philosophical wordplay with no practical consequences, but when understood with the depth it deserves, it changes absolutely everything. The distinction between having consciousness and being consciousness. In ordinary language, the way almost everyone talks about their inner experience, consciousness is treated as a property of the human being, something a human possesses just like a body, a name, and a story. It's said that human beings are conscious beings, that they have conscious experiences, that compared to a rock or a thermostat, they possess something called consciousness, which makes them qualitatively different. All this language treats consciousness as an object, as something that exists within the human being, as a quality that belongs to them and that could, in principle, be lost, diminished, or increased. And this way of speaking, which seems so natural and innocuous, reflects and at the same time reinforces a fundamental confusion about the true structure of experience. Because if you honestly and carefully investigate the structure of your own experience at this exact moment as you listen to these words, if you look directly at what's happening without taking anything for granted, you'll find something that completely reverses that relationship. Thoughts appear in consciousness, not consciousness in thoughts. Bodily sensations appear in consciousness, not consciousness in sensations. Emotions appear in consciousness. Memories appear in consciousness. Sensory perceptions, the sounds reaching you through the audio of this video, the sights of your surroundings, the temperature you feel on your skin, all appear in the field of consciousness. Even the idea of being a self, even the sense of being a specific someone situated in a specific body at a specific moment in time, that very experience appears in consciousness like any other content. There's nothing you can experience that doesn't appear in that field. Nothing can be experienced outside of it, because experience itself is consciousness encountering its own contents. This means that consciousness isn't inside the human being in the way water is inside a glass. The human being as experience from within is within consciousness. The body appears in it. Thoughts appear. The feeling of being a person with a history and a name and a set of personal characteristics appears in it like any other. And if everything you are capable of experiencing appears in consciousness, then the most fundamental question one can ask is not what is within my consciousness, but what am I in relation to it? Resu pure. Am I the content that appears in that field, or am I the field itself? Am I the waves, or am I the ocean? And the answer that the deepest contemplative traditions consistently offer, the answer that direct investigation of one's own experience confirms when carried out with sufficient care and sufficient honesty, is baffling in its simplicity. There is no self separate from consciousness that is having it as if it were a possession. Consciousness belongs to no one because no one exists separate from it. It is the space in which everything appears, the field in which all experience arises and dissolves, including bodies, including minds, including the feeling of being a self that observes everything else from a privileged viewpoint. In Advaita Vedanta, the non-dual tradition of India that has explored this question with greater technical precision and greater conceptual rigor than any other known tradition, this is expressed in the formula Tattvam Asi. Yes, that is you. You are not the body. You are not the mind. You are not the personal story. You are that all-containing consciousness. That presence that illuminates everything without being illuminated by anything external, because it is light itself. That witness that observes everything without being reducible to an object of observation, because it is observation itself before it divides into observer and observed. And Nisargadatta Maharaj, one of the most direct and most lucid teachers this tradition produced in the 20th century, said it in a way that leaves no room for ambiguity. What is born and dies is the body. What feels pleasure and pain is the mind. But you are that in which the body and mind appear. You are the witness of both, and the witness is neither born nor dies, neither suffers nor enjoys. It simply knows. It simply is. Ramana Maharshi, another of the great Vedanta masters of the 20th century, proposed a practice as simple in its statement as it is profound in its application, self-inquiry. The question, who am I? Not to get a conceptual answer, but to trace the experience of being back to its origin, to follow that sense of a bowl, that sense of being someone, backward, inward, to the point where that sense emerges, to discover that it emerges from something that has no eyeball, that emerges from a silent, impersonal presence that precedes all identity. And when this is understood, not as a philosophical idea added to the collection of ideas one already has, but as a direct experience, even if for a fleeting instant that can barely be sustained. The world I knew completely reorganizes, not the facts of the world, not the external circumstances, which remain exactly what they are, but the relationship with all of that. Because the one I thought I was, that small, limited, I'm living in permanent tension between what I wanted and what I had, between what I feared losing and what I hoped to gain, between what others thought of him and what he thought of himself. That reveals itself as a wave that mistook its wave nature for something separate from the ocean that generates it. The wave is real. The wave genuinely is what it is. But what the wave is in its deepest nature is not the form it has at this moment, but the ocean expressing itself through that form. And the ocean was never something different from the wave. It was always the wave expressing itself, ocean, and the ocean expressing itself as wave. Consciousness is what you are when you stop defining yourself solely by the contents that appear within you, in the same way that the ocean is what the wave is. When it stops defining itself solely by its particular form at this moment. If this truth starts to feel real within you, not as a concept, but as something you recognize. Right now, I am the awareness that observes, and if this revelation is illuminating something deep within you, you can support this space with a super chat as a conscious gesture to sustain this teaching and allow it to reach more souls who are seeking it. There's a fundamental difference between reading about water and getting wet, between meticulously studying the maps of a city and actually walking its streets on a rainy afternoon, between intellectually understanding a detailed description of coffee's taste and bringing the cup to your lips in a moment of silence. Everything that has been explored on this journey up to this point has been preparation, has been the map, has been the description. It has been the sign pointing to the moon, but it is not the moon. And the map is not the territory. And the sign that points is not the thing pointed to. And the most precise and beautiful description of taste neither nourishes nor satisfies. What you are about to do is different from everything before. It is not a visualization exercise, nor a relaxation technique nor any kind of practice that requires reaching some special state you don't normally have. It doesn't require believing in anything specific or adopting any doctrinal stance. It doesn't require you to have meditated before or to have experience in any contemplative tradition. It's simply an invitation to look directly at what's already happening in your experience right now with greater clarity, with less interference from the mind's habits, with the honesty of someone genuinely willing to see what is there instead of confirming what they already believe is there. The first thing needed isn't to do something, but to let go of the tendency to do. There's a deeply ingrained habit in the human mind that could be called the impulse of management, the constant and involuntary tendency to evaluate what's happening at every moment, to classify it as good or bad, trying to amplify it when it seems positive, or to try to reduce or eliminate it when it seems negative. This impulse operates almost continuously and almost completely automatically. It's so ubiquitous that most people confuse it with what it means to be awake, or to be thinking, or to be functioning well. And it's precisely this impulse, this perpetual movement of evaluation and management, that prevents the witness's experience.
Because the witness doesn't manage, the witness doesn't evaluate, the witness doesn't have preferences about what appears, the witness is simply present with what is.
Just observe. So the first step in this practice isn't to suppress that urge to manage. It's not to fight it or discipline it or ask it to leave. It's simply to notice it when it appears, to recognize it, to see it for what it is, just another content appearing in the field of your experience, noticing it with the same dispassionate equanimity with which you would notice the sound of a plane passing over the house, something that happens in the field of your experience without you needing to do anything about it, without anything fundamental changing in what you observe. Once you've begun to establish that relationship of equanimous observation towards the urge to manage itself, something in the field of your attention begins to change in a subtle but perceptible way. There begins to be more space between the events of experience, a slight opening, a small but real decrease in the usual pressure, and in that space, something becomes possible that in the ordinary state of continuous tension and management was much more difficult: to observe the contents of experience clearly without being swept by them. The thoughts circulating right now, observe them without following them, without swimming after them to see where they lead, without evaluating them as important or irrelevant. They are like fish passing through the visual field of a motionless diver at the bottom of the sea. They appear in your field of consciousness. They move through it, disappearing somewhere on the inner horizon, without any need to follow them or do anything with them. The bodily sensations that you might notice right now, the pressure of the seat or the floor beneath your body, the temperature of the air on your skin. Any tension or comfort you might feel in any part of your body, observe them with the same equanimity. They are phenomena that appear in the field of your consciousness. They change continuously. They have a life of their own. They don't need to be modified or judged for the observation to be valid. Emotions, if there are any present at this moment, a slight anxiety perhaps, curiosity or calm, or any other emotional texture that is active, let it be exactly as it is. Don't try to change it. into something more positive or delve into it to see what it contains. Observe it as you would observe the weather, something that happens in the sky without needing to do anything about it for it to be completely what it is. Once you have established this relationship of equanimous presence with the contents of experience, there's an additional movement that goes deeper than everything before. It's the movement that Zen masters describe with the image of turning the light inward. Don't search outside, don't search in the contents, but turn your attention towards what allows all those contents are perceived, not towards a particular object, but towards the space in which all objects appear. Instead of observing what appears, try to observe what observes. Don't look for an image of it because it has no visible form. Don't look for a sensation of it because it precedes all sensation. Simply direct your attention in that direction and stay with the most honest question you can formulate right now. What is it that is aware of all this? What is it that knows there are thoughts? What is it that knows there are sensations? What is it that is present amidst this entire changing flow of experiences? What was here before you started listening to these words? And what will still be here when you've forgotten everything that was said in them? Stay with that question without trying to answer it with words, without trying to capture the answer in any concept or image or description. The answer to this question does not come in the form of a thought. It cannot come in the form of a thought, because what it seeks is what precedes all thoughts. It comes in the form of a silent recognition, which cannot be fully captured by any verbal description, but which anyone who experiences it, even for an instant, immediately recognizes as something qualitatively different from any other type of knowledge. It's the knowledge that knows without a separate object to know, consciousness aware of itself without mediation, the observer discovering himself as the observation without a separate observer watching the observation, the silence that isn't an absence of sound, but the depth from which all sound emerges and to which all sound returns. Stay with that for as long as you can, or as long as it's genuine. Duration doesn't matter. There's no minimum for this to be valid. What matters isn't how long you can hold yourself in that direction, but the genuineness of the contact, because an instant of real contact with what you are at the deepest level transforms more than hours of practice done from the surface of effort and technique. If you're living this experience as you listen, if you feel a stillness different from ordinary stillness right now, I remain as the witness. And if this experience is resonating intensely within you, you can contribute with a super chat as a conscious, energetic gesture, as a way to honor this moment of contact with what has always been here. One of the most transformative consequences that emerge when the recognition of one's own nature as consciousness begins to settle in, not just intellectually, but as a living, accessible, experiential reference, is the way it fundamentally changes the experience of relating to others. More, not as an attitude change one consciously decides to adopt, not as the application of a spiritual principle about the unity of existence that wasn't considered before, but as an organic transformation in how one perceives others from within the experience itself. Because If, because if consciousness is not encapsulated within an individual, if it's not a property each person exclusively and separately possesses, like they possess their memories or their name, but the field in which all individuals appear, then the separation between you and others, even if it remains completely functional and necessary on a practical level, is no longer absolute at an essential level. It's exactly like the waves of the ocean. Each wave is genuinely different from all the others. It has its own shape, its own height, its own speed, its own way of breaking on the shore. No two waves are identical, and no one who has observed the sea carefully would deny it. Wave is made of something different from the ocean. There's no place where a wave ends and the ocean begins, as if they were two distinct substances in contact. The wave is the ocean moving in that particular way at that particular moment. The wave doesn't own the ocean. The wave is the ocean, and the ocean never stopped being the ocean by becoming a wave. When this is applied not as a poetic metaphor, but as a genuine description of the structure of relational experience, what emerges has enormous practical consequences that manifest in everyday life in concrete and verifiable ways. The understanding that the people who appear in your life are not completely external to what you are expressions of the same consciousness that you are, manifesting through configurations of conditioning, personal history, circumstances, and temperament completely different, like characters in a play, sharing the same stage, even though each one lives their own drama, with all the seriousness and intensity that drama requires. There's a practice that appears in various contemplative traditions and becomes naturally understandable from this perspective. It consists of using emotional reactions intense towards other people as mirrors of one's own inner self when someone deeply irritates you. When a characteristic of another person creates in you an emotional charge clearly disproportionate to what the objective situation would seem to justify, when someone's behavior triggers in you an intense response that you yourself find excessive or difficult to control, that intensity isn't just information about the other person. It's information about you. It usually points to something active in your own psyche, something that hasn't been recognized or integrated, something the other reflects with a clarity that is uncomfortable precisely because it's too close. Because what disturbs us most in others is often what we cannot tolerate, recognizing in ourselves. The anger you condemn in the other can be a mirror of the anger you deny in yourself. The arrogance you find unbearable in someone can point to a different arrogance that lives in you under another name. The weakness you despise in others can be the exact reflection of the weakness you fear most in yourself. See this not as an accusation, but as an invitation, not to blame you, but to know you, to see in the mirror that others offer an image of yourself that no physical mirror can show. Similarly, what you admire most in people who genuinely inspire you, that admiration that doesn't taste of envy, but of recognition. Little of it is completely outside of you, not in the naive sense that you already are what you admire in them, but in the precise sense that you recognize something in them that resonates with a possibility that lives dormant or latent within your own being. Genuine admiration always has that particular quality of recognition. You feel that what you see in that person speaks to something that also belongs to you, even if you haven't actualized it yet. As if meeting that person were a reminder of what you are capable of being when the layers of fear and habit thin out enough. When this understanding begins to settle into how you relate to others, the quality of relationships changes in a profound and sometimes surprising way. Conflicts don't disappear, differences aren't erased. The frictions inherent in human coexistence continue to exist with all their complexity, the existential burden added to them, the weight of the threat, the feeling that every conflict risks something fundamental about who you are. This significantly diminishes because you are no longer relating to a completely separate and potentially threatening other whose actions and judgments have the power to determine your worth, your security, or your fundamental well-being. You are relating to another expression of who you are at the deepest level, and that difference, even if it doesn't automatically resolve any specific conflict or eliminate any practical difficulty, it changes the ground upon which all conflicts occur. Love, seen from this perspective, is not primarily a feeling that appears and disappears according to circumstances. It is a recognition. The recognition of one's own essence in another transforms. The moment consciousness sees itself in the mirror of the other, and what it sees feels familiar in a way no shared history can fully explain. And compassion is not primarily a virtue cultivated through moral effort, nor a stance consciously adopted towards those who suffer. It is the natural and spontaneous response of someone who recognizes in the suffering of another the same movement of forgetting and searching that they know within themselves, the same fundamental confusion, the same thirst for something they cannot name, the same being seeking to remember what it always was. This is the understanding that contemplative traditions pointed to when they spoke of the unity of all existence, not a unity that erases differences and turns everything into a kind of homogeneity without texture or color, but a unity that underlies all differences without denying them, that contains them without reducing them to anything less than what they are. The ocean that is completely real, even though all the waves are also completely real. If you've ever felt that everything is connected in a way that words can describe, right now, reflection in everything. And if this message is awakening a deep understanding within you, you can support this community with a super chat as a conscious way to expand this shared vibration. Now, remain silent for an instant. Breathe, feel your presence, not the presence of a self that needs to be protected or improved or completed or validated, the presence that was already there before you started listening to these words, the presence that will still be there when this video ends, and the ordinary noise of the mind returns to occupy the space that momentarily opened, the presence that has been with you in every moment of your life without exception, in moments of joy and in moments of darkness, moments of clarity and in moments of densest, in moments when you felt completely alive, and in moments when you could barely continue. It was always there, needing nothing from any of those moments to be completely what it is. What you have explored today is not new information added to what you already knew. It is the recognition of something that was always present, but which the constant noise of the ordinary mind busy evaluating and managing and planning and worrying kept invisible. The observer that you are was not born when you were born. It does not change when your circumstances change. It does not diminish when you suffer. It does not gain success. It does not become wiser when you learn new things, nor more ignorant when you forget them. It precedes all that. It is deeper than all that. And it is at the most essential level of what you can be completely free, not free from circumstances, because circumstances will remain what they are, free within them, free among them, free like the sky, which is free in relation to all the clouds that pass through it, without any of them being able to affect the nature of the sky. This channel is a space for those who are beginning to remember what they always knew, for those who feel that life is deeper and vaster than what the surface reveals, for souls who have intuited that the search they carry within cannot be satisfied by any external, and who are willing to look honestly in the only direction where the answer can truly be found. If this journey resonated with you, if something you heard today stirred a certainty you thought was unshakable, or ignited a possibility you had never allowed yourself to consider, then something has happened that cannot be easily undone. Because once the observer has seen themselves, even for an ephemeral instant, something in the structure of illusion has weakened in a way that is not easily reversible. Subscribe and walk alongside this community of souls who are choosing step by step to live from depth instead of from the surface. And if you wish to support this space, you can do so with a super chat as a conscious gesture, so that this light continues to reach those who are looking for it without yet knowing where to look. Take with you this simple, beautiful, absolute truth. You are not what happens. You are that which observes.